Welcome to the Asia Climate Finance Podcast, where our host and his guest discuss and evaluate climate business and climate finance issues and trends. Please support us by liking and subscribing to the podcast. Also, please note the disclaimers at the end of the show. Here is your host, investor analyst and author, Joseph Jacobelli.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 47 of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Today's a very interesting conversation because we're talking about experiences from a renewable energy development projects development point of view, and someone who's worked both in North America and the ASEAN region as well as Bangladesh, and he's going to compare and contrast some of his experiences. Our guest is Steve Shi, who is the Overseas Transaction Manager for Sungrow Asia Pacific, currently based in Manila. Sungrow, as many of you know, is a well-known Chinese renewables company, a renewables equipment company, which is most famous for its inverters, but actually they do quite a bit of overseas renewable energy projects development. Enjoy the show. Hello again and welcome to episode 47. So as I mentioned in the introduction, today our guest is Steve Shi, who is currently based in Manila, but basically is based in the whole of Asia because he travels around quite a lot. Hello, Steve. How are you?
Oh, hi, Joseph. I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thank you for making the time. Really very grateful for that. Steve, could we perhaps first start with you, just quick introduction of yourself and what you've been doing?
Sure, definitely. Well, thank you, Joseph, for having me today. Currently, I'm working for Sungrow Renewables. We are the wholly owned affiliate of Sungrow Power Supply Group. So the group is famous for inverters. So the group focuses on inverters and batteries manufacturing, right? And our Sungrow Renewables are completely dedicated to renewable project development and operation. So myself is responsible for coordinating the M&A activities in Southeast Asia under our overseas business division. So right now I'm based in Manila, Philippines, recently because we have projects in this country right now. Before joining Sungrow, I was working for an IPP based in Toronto, Canada. So during that time, I was working in the business development team with a focus on project acquisition and the greenfield project development. So the company's business covers both Canada and the US. So I got some chance to learn about the renewable energy industry and the electric power sector in North America. So as I said, I feel thrilled to get invited to talk about some renewable energy industries across different markets. So I really appreciate the chance today, and I will try my best to share some of my views and observations. And also, as requested by the company policy, I need a disclaimer here that what I said and will say only present my personal view and are from public sources. So my opinions have nothing to do with the current projects I'm working on or anything related to my current job or previous companies. Thank you.
Right. No problem. That's totally understood. And one disclaimer on my side, actually in my home in Hong Kong, I do have a Sungrow inverter, so I'm very happy with the product. So, but no bias, no bias on the
Good to know that. Yeah.
So Steve, I think the conversation that we had kind of planned is really to do with a very interesting angle, because you've got the kind of business development experiences in North America, and now you've been in Southeast Asia for a while, so you've kind of developed some experiences there. And I thought that listeners would be very, very interested in knowing what are some of the key differences that you found between those two markets. So what were the key experiences in North America that you found would be, quite helpful in project development in the ASEAN region?
Okay, so it's really a great question. So I think firstly, I need to clarify a little bit that I am not specialized in project development. So I'm more on the transaction side, which involves primarily modeling, financing, due diligence, and deal execution. But normally, I have intensive communications with our project development team colleagues on daily basis. Also, each time when I meet with investors, I need to be able to give some updates on the overall development progress and status.
Right.
So in terms of that, I do have something to I can share with everyone. So I think if you talk about the most helpful experience that I got from my experience in North America, I would say the first thing I can think of is the kind of the core logic of developing renewable energy. So I think to some extent it's similar across different markets. So the differences are more about the approach or the methodology to achieve those targets. So give a very easy, simple example is that, so in solar projects, we like either in North America or in Philippines, we also use PV system report and we use wind energy assessment report. Probably just different names on, like, for example, system impact study versus like grid constraint or curtailment study. So those type of stuff. So only I think there are slightly difference in names. And also in terms of the steps to develop a project, I think almost all the renewable energy projects, no matter it is a wind or a solar or even like energy storage, basically there will be some similar stages. So for example, when we develop projects in the US, like assuming that you have already determined that the natural resources, including the radiation and the wind speed, are satisfying, so then we will follow some general steps. First, I think it will be some desktop research, for example, according to some regulations of like FAA or like some critical issues analysis. And then the next important thing is about the land and site control or land titles. So we need to convey the land rights required to execute the proposed project, and we have to like secure contractual rights to the site at or near the conclusion of pre-development stage. And especially in the States, for those projects in the West, so federal agencies should verify like whether the proposed site is administered or like affected by the Bureau of Land Management, right? So those type of stuff. And also you have to do a lot of due diligence work, vital report, and also you need to research on those minerals and do some biological studies. And for certain regions, you also need to do some works on the wetland delineation and also some flood control flood control areas. So then that's for the land part. And also you need to the next critical part will be the interconnection application. So as you may know that there are like 7 US independent systems. We call that ISO. So there are 7 ISO operators and also like more than 10 major utilities covering the rest part of the country, so including the southeast and the west. And by the way, I'll just right now the average waiting time for the interconnection application is more than like 3 years. But I will elaborate on that point later. So that's for interconnection, and then the next step will be, or the next stage will be like permitting, right? So for a project, you definitely need to get a variety of permittings before construction can be started, right? So from that's all kinds of permittings, from local building permits, like so the internal authorizations to the satisfaction of like NEPA requirements, and also, for example, the environmental side assessments, water, wildlife, fish, bird, everything, agriculture, those type of stuff. So it's a very, very long list for each project. And also the next part will be design and engineering for sure. And also you need to get a PPA. That's the best scenario, right? And also I think this step is also very important. And also this work takes time. So the work should start much earlier than the project starts. And I think the last part will be the finance, the capital, right? Project finance, whatever, or tax equity in the United States. So whatever it costs. So I think that's some major elements in a project development process, right? So basically, for example, right now I'm working on a project in the Philippines. So generally, based on my observation, the stages are quite similar. Maybe probably the importance are maybe slightly different. But overall, the core logic, as I said, the core logic of developing a project is quite similar. So overall, the knowledge can be partially transferred from North America to Philippines or the other ASEAN countries. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the most the first thing I can think of if you ask me about something that will be helpful, like based on my experience. Yeah.
Right. So what you're saying basically is that the actual steps are quite similar, although the kind of importance of individual steps may be slightly different between Southeast Asia and North America. You mentioned something about taking as much as 3 years to get approval for the projects in North America. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that surprised me a lot when I come back to Asia, right? So giving just some background here. So right now, like as I said, there are 7 ISOs and also more than 10 regions in the States. I mean, in terms of electric power market. So right now, based on some research numbers saying that there are over 2,000 gigawatts like actively undergoing like the impact studies to connect to the grid, right? So be specific is that, so California, there's a CAISO there. So CAISO has the largest interconnection queue, longest line. So there are around like nearly 500 gigawatts of capacity under review. They are waiting for the impact studies to be done. And the PJM, there are a lot of solar projects there. And I think that the capacity in the line is around 170 gigawatts. So, So the long feasibility study permitting timelines I think it's one of the top energy transition hurdles in the States. So back to your question, so the average duration from like when a project is dropped in a queue to its proposed online date ranges from like 37 months to 70 months. So the quickest one is for PJM. It takes about 3 years. And the longest one's for like the Southwest Power Pool, which takes about more than 5 years. So I think that's the reality in the States right now. So basically, as a project developer, like if you propose something, and you probably have to wait for the interconnection application, that will take you around maybe at least 3 to 4 years. So, which brings a lot of risks, and the cost.
Of course. Yeah. And what about the experience so far in ASEAN as far as you can see?
Yeah, sure. So in ASEAN, even though some of the regulation system is not as complete or developed than that in the States, the processing time is much faster. So one of the projects I'm working on, it only takes 3 years, no more than 3 years, 2 to 3 years from submitting the proposal to the construction starts. So it's much faster than that in the States.
So when it comes to regulation, obviously, we've got a situation in ASEAN where regulation in every country is very, very, very different. And I'm guessing that there are some differences between Canada and the US. But in terms of everything that you've come across, are there 1, 2, or 3 things on the regulation front which kind of surprised you in Southeast Asia versus North America?
Definitely, because as you just mentioned, because there are difference between North America and Asia, and secondly, there are 10 countries in ASEAN regions. So there are 10 different countries there. So
yes.
So they are different in many levels. So firstly, I want to say, actually, no matter in which country, in which market, the power industry is always heavily regulated. That is kind of like a common sense that different countries will set different regulation system based on their country's needs and the real situation. But that reminds me of time capsule theory. It means that every economy and country may follow a similar path to develop, more or less. So I believe that what has happened in the developed countries will also take place in developing countries as well at a certain point, just a matter of time. So look what the electricity market look like in the US, in the UK, in Europe, and in Australia. According to their unique situation, those ASEAN countries will highly likely gradually, step by step, build up the similar electricity market in the future, right? So eventually, probably their generation, their transmission and distribution functions will be independent from the government control, right? So the private sector investors will participate in their energy transformation. So from that perspective, I think if you are familiar with those markets in developed countries, your knowledge and experience may be helpful. Like when you have the chance to witness the same thing happen again in some developing countries, right? And to address your question about some differences in regulation system, I think in some Southeast countries, we can see that there's a lack of approval from the perspective of technical department. So what does that mean? It means that there are too many projects have been approved, like without consulting the electricity regulators, or you can say without a plan. It shows that the governments are very eager to increase their capacity in a very short period of time. So unlike Japan, like what I heard was that the Japan government has a constant and a manageable new generation capacity rollout plan, right?
Yes.
So additionally, you can see that in ASEAN countries, many of the countries, they only have a big plan, but there are not clear instructions or stable policies to regulate the development process. And some standards in the approval process are pretty ambiguous. So, but I think it can be supported mainly through like transparent policy that country are able to roll out there and provide a roadmap for investors and developers of these projects to bring those into operation. But I think everything will be better in the future. So that's my belief. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you're being overly optimistic. I think that the trajectory of development of renewable energy in ASEAN, I mean, it's been bumpy. Some years are better than others, but at the end of the day, it's been increasing massively and remains a very, very attractive market. When you're dealing in North America versus ASEAN, did you find major differences when you're trying to obviously try to sign a PPA and structure the PPA?
Yeah, for sure. That is also another critical component of a project, right? So, for speaking of PPA, I think the most thing like you can think of is the price, right? So the electricity price, the PPA price, is another thing that I find very different across different markets. So actually, the electricity price is much higher than I expected in Southeast Asia or ASEAN regions. So it's quite counterintuitive that the energy price in developing country is actually unaffordable at all. So I remember that in States, the price varies, right, in different nodes. So it's different, yes. It's different markets mechanism. But the PPA price for wind is normally, well, it's also depend on different locations, but normally it's below like 5 cents per kilowatt for most of the states. And the price for solar is even lower. But on the contrary, that, for example, the GF2 PPA price in Philippines is almost 8 cents per kilowatt. So it's almost more than like 50% higher than the price in the United States. And in Bangladesh, the price for solar is around 9 to 10 cents per kilowatt. Right. Wow. So I was trying to think what's the driver of this. So one reason might be that ASEAN countries they have to import a large amount of fuels to satisfy their needs for energy, right? So Philippines, for example, the retail electricity for commercial is around 12 cents per kilowatt, and the residential electricity is reaching 20 cents per kilowatt. So almost the highest country in Southeast Asia. So in any month, at least 90% of electricity from Morocco, which is the biggest distribution company in Philippines. So 90% of the electricity is generated from fossil fuels. So I think that's one of the main reasons that's why the electric power price in Southeast Asia is so high. So so that's really given me a kind of a shock there. And also because there are different levels of how to say that, like the development of industrialization. So because the economic structure is different in two locations. In North America, after all, it's a developed country, right? So there are industrial companies and also maybe data centers that need a PPA. But here in Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries, the market is less open than in the US. In the US, so PPAs usually we sign the PPA with the transco rather than a single company or like a third-party company. So I think that's kind of some fundamental difference in terms of the PPA.
Yeah, I mean, prices in places like Japan and like the Philippines have historically been extremely high by global standards. And recently, because of the depreciation of Japanese yen, the price per kilowatt hour in Japan looks a little bit lower. But in fact, if you use a old exchange rate, you can see that it's still sky high because they've suffered from high pricing from gas and coal. We've talked about some of your kind of key experiences in North America versus ASEAN. We've talked about what are the things that kind of surprised you in the ASEAN markets. And the third area that I wanted to just cover is how do you think about some of the markets, from your own personal perspective? And maybe we can pick the Philippines first, just because you're there.
Yeah, sure. So Philippines is I know Philippines well because we have projects here, and I have been staying here for several months. So I think overall, Philippines has a great energy plan here. So I think everyone in the market knows about the 2020 to 2040 Philippines energy plan. So I don't need to talk too much about this. So I think that overall, I think the Philippines is the most open market in the ASEAN region right now because of its merchant electricity market. I think the market is basically reformed based on the one act named the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, which was released in 2001. So basically, the act, the goal of the act is to restructure the electric power industry by privatizing the generation, transmission, distribution, and the supply of the power sector, right? So many restrictions have been removed. So it's kind of, you can see that it's a tailwind for private sector investors to participate. So basically right now, you will sign the PPA with the Transco, not, as I said, not any company. So in 2024, look at other economies around the world, not many opportunities available, right, to sign a PPA with a Transco. So in addition to that, there are also some exemptions on VAT on local equipment and construction, and also the electricity generated from renewable resources are exempted from the VAT as well. So basically, the overall regulation system in Philippines is well established. So you have clear instructions on each step. And you can find a report is established by DOE that has clearly instruct you how to do for each step. So based on current information is that the GEP3 will be held in August 2024, but that will also only focus on non-FIT eligible renewable technologies, including like geothermal or like impounding hydro or pumped storage hydro. So not highly relevant to me. So in terms of the a project development in Philippines, I can say that there are several important elements. The first thing is you have to get the business license and permits from DOE, which is Department of Energy, and the BOI. And also you need to get some the environmental compliance certificate from they call that DENR. And then that's part for the business license. And then similarly, as I mentioned earlier, the next step will be the grid interconnection permits from DOE, right? You have to complete some regulation requirements from ERC, and you have to obtain the COC, which is the Certificate of Compliance, and also you have to get the metering service agreement. We call that MSA, and also the transmission service agreement. So basically, as I said again, it's all clearly instructed in their report. So you just simply follow the steps to get there. And the next part will be the land control, which involves the title transfer of the lands and the right of way and the easement. And then speaking of which, I think probably I missed that before, because land issue is a very, very high risky portion of developing a project in Southeast countries. So usually in Southeast countries, there are many landlords, owners involved in renewable energy projects, especially for solar projects, right? So many of the projects were were unsuccessful simply because they cannot get the land control done. So it's always like a pain in the butt. So you always have to keep an eye on that part. And when you complete the land control, you have to get the support and approval from local government units. For example, in Philippines, you need to get approval from barangay, and you have to get the approval from the city and also province. And then the next part will be you have to obtain different kinds of construction permits, which includes the locational clearance, maybe some also building permits, electrical permit, water permits, and the list is also very long. And finally, I think another important part will be you have to complete some feasibility studies, right? So you have to do the system impact study, hydrological and flooding study, because it is in Philippines. So and also, I'm not sure if I will touch on that point later, because I can bring it here that because the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure is also another kind of bottleneck for like ASEAN countries. So you do the grid congestion. So that's the point of the system impact study here. I think that's the basic fundamental information about the project development in Philippines.
So it's actually very interesting, Steve, that your experience, and I know you've only been there for a few months, but your experience has been relatively positive. I mean, of course, there are frustrations because you have to run around and get different permits from different offices, but that's part of the nature of the game, I guess.
Well,
But in the last few years, the Philippines, well, a few years ago, the Philippines had a really negative reputation because investors felt that it was moving, 2 steps forward and then 5 steps back when it came to renewables. So it's great that there's been a massive shift. Talking about another market, what about Vietnam?
Yeah, Vietnam is also an interesting place. It means that there are a lot of stories in this market. As you may know, that the PDP-8 sets out the country's electricity roadmap for the period through to 2030, right? So they also have a vision towards 2045. So basically, I think that represents Vietnam's clearest commitment towards decarbonization since they announced that in October, in 2021, the COP26 summit, right? But the reality is that if you are really following Vietnam market, you will know that the reality is that the COVID-related construction and supply chain delays resulted in many solar and wind projects in Vietnam failing to achieve the COD before the feed-in tariff deadline of 2020, the year end of 2020, right? And so many investors and developers are facing the problems of stranded assets because the Vietnam government they still don't have a clear policy or guidance on the electricity price, even though they established the so-called transition period price. The ceiling price is still too low for investors to collect their investments. So I can give you some numbers here. So right now, the so-called the transition period price is only 5 cents, nearly 5 cents for onshore solar and 7 cents for onshore wind. And you have to remember that previously the feed price was around 7 cents for onshore solar and almost 8.5 cents for onshore wind. So it was at least 20 to 30% drop in the price. So I was told that the new PPA will not be available until early next year. So in the short term, I feel like there are less chance to develop a greenfield project in Vietnam right now. However, there might be some chances to acquire some operating assets with a discounted price given the circumstance right now. But again,
Right.
I think the bankability is in doubt under such circumstance. Also, to echo your point about the Philippines market, so I do hear what you said. So I agree with you that the policy issue, or like you said, maybe some ambiguity in the policy is a common thing in Southeast countries, and
Yes.
also probably that also requires some work in maintaining or building the relationship with the government and also some the government officers here. But I think that's a non-technical part, so I didn't elaborate on that part. But being honest, we will face similar situations no matter in which country in
Of course.
South Asia countries, right? Yeah. Yeah. So specifically for about the Vietnam. So yeah. So I think also the risks also rise from the congestion and the curtailment due to the lack of transmission infrastructure. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the kind of grid bottlenecks and the lag effect of building grids is a problem we see all over the world. I mean, we see it in Europe, we see it in
course.
even to some extent in China. And China is very, very, very good at it. But even in China, there are some grid bottlenecks. Another market I wanted to speak about very quickly was Bangladesh.
Yeah. Bangladesh. I know that not many investors are interested in Bangladesh because due to some certain country risk, or I'm not sure if that's appropriate to say that in this way. But even like in 2016, I think Bangladesh published their Vision 2041 plan to develop their electricity generations in terms of capacity, efficiency, and also the weightings of clean energy, right? So, but due to some problems carried over from the past, so the present structure of power sector is still at an early stage, so to speak. So basically, the power generation, transmission, and distribution are still under the government's control, right? So especially when you compare that to some other regulation system in other part of the world. So here in Bangladesh, the basic development process is also similar. Like you have to get approvals from multiple government organizations to get an LOI first, and then after LOI, you need to secure all the land, and then you have the chance to sign in the PPA, and also. In Bangladesh, the most headache is the land issue. So you know that sunlight is abundant in Bangladesh, but in one of the most densely populated countries like on Earth, there are inadequate land here. So, and also the moreover is that the land titles disputes are very common in Bangladesh, still due to some problems carry over from the past when Bangladesh was colonized 200 years, actually. So as a result, sometimes it's nearly impossible to get the ultimately clean land records or titles because there have been too many stories, too many people, families, too many things have happened. So in Bangladesh, it's very funny that each landowner only owns literally a slice of the land. So it's a normal situation that for a solar project, I have to deal with over 100 landowners to negotiate the price and figure out the ownership issue. It's sometimes most of the projects also was killed because they cannot get the land, they cannot secure the land. So why the Bangladesh is interesting is that the PPA price is really high. Like right now, you can get around maybe 10 cents per kilowatt for now. So even though I know it's probably it's risky there, but if you have the power, you have the resources, you can take a look on this market as well.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. No, that's very interesting. Very interesting points. Although the land rights issue is not an uncommon problem in many countries all around Asia. I had one final question, Steve, if I could, and it's basically, what's your overall kind of gut feeling over the next 25 years, thinking about 2050 and net zero? What's your overall outlook on these markets?
Well, I think it's a really big question. So I'm not sure if I have if I'm capable of giving such outlook. But I just simply want to share some of my thoughts or observations here. So I understand that people are curious about this region, right? And they actively look for opportunities here. So I totally agree with the view that the trend of acceleration in developing capacities for renewable energy is obvious. But they are like something that you need to at least consider that when you do some analysis on this market. I think the first thing is that the actual capital deployed in this region is still low. So to answer your question, so I still have believed that in the next 20-25 years, there will be a lot of money or capital will be deployed in this region. So over the past 5 years, the region attracted only the second lowest levels of investment, only ahead of sub-Saharan Africa, right? So as I said, because they have a pretty undeveloped, pretty low level of industrialization, and also the development level of transmission infrastructure. So it cannot be like you cannot build renewable energy capacity in a very short period, right? So so it's going to be a very long process. And according to the conversation with people from ADB, right, they told me that basically there's no shortage of capital available, right, both on debt or on the equity side, but they are more likely to invest in operational renewable projects. So why is that? I believe the issue is that in Southeast Asia is around creating more and more bankable projects. So there are a lot of projects maybe in the pipeline, but when you talk about bankable projects, there are not many. So maybe due to the reason of land issue with maybe the regulation, maybe other factors, but so there are a lot of like early stage projects here, but for really operating projects, not many, right? So investors should be cautious about that. And so another thing I think will be, I think it's a common sense actually. So as I mentioned, the ASEAN, so there are 10 countries. They are hugely different on so many different levels. So when investors consider investing money in ASEAN, don't treat it as a whole. So you must do to look into each country deeply and separately. So so every country has a unique approach to their renewable energy sector. So you should also use different ways to conduct analysis. And currently in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, no doubt, has the largest operating capacity, and the Thailand and the Philippines is in second and third places. And in terms of perspective capacity, Philippines has 99 gigawatts, and Vietnam has 85 gigawatts. So after all, so it's still a big market and with great potential. So after all, this sector is heavily relied on the support from the government and the policy. So I think investors should be more patient, or you can or you can simply invest in our Sungrow's project. because our current business model is just turnkey project to eliminate the development and construction risks for investors, right? Okay, and I think the last thing I have repeatedly mentioned is that it's about the infrastructure bottleneck. I think that the electric power market development is a complicated and a long-term project. It needs balance, right? So you cannot simply just create maybe 10 gigawatts capacity in maybe 2 to 3 years without building any transmission grid. So as the old saying, like Rome wasn't built in one day. So investing in electric power market is also a long-term thing. So maybe at current point there are less chances in investing in renewable energy projects itself, but probably there are opportunities in investing in electric power related infrastructure and transmission line. So just I hope that people can be more open to different types of chances or investment opportunities.
Got it.
Yeah.
This was a really fantastic discussion, Steve, to share your experiences in North America versus Asia and your views on the Asia Pacific region in general, because we mentioned Bangladesh as well. So once again, big thank you for your time, Steve. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Please note that the Asia Climate Finance Podcast is presented for educational purposes only. All information in the podcast must not be construed as investment advice. Always consult a licensed investment professional before making investment decisions. Also, please note that the views and opinions expressed by our guests are personal and may not represent the views and opinions of current or previous employers.